He despised black women, but one blind date broke a Korean Mafia boss. Tae-hoon had a rule about black women. He didn't date them, didn't work with them, didn't acknowledge them in the rooms where power was negotiated and blood debts were settled. It wasn't written in any ledger or spoken at the table where Busan's underworld made its decisions. It simply existed carved into him the same way his father had carved territory lines into this port city before a rival's bullet ended his reign. In Tae-hoon's world, rules weren't suggestions. They were survival. His aunt had different ideas. "One dinner," she said, that Tuesday afternoon, her voice cutting through the silence of his office like a blade through water. "That's all I'm asking." Tae-hoon didn't look up from the shipping manifest spread across his desk. Numbers told stories, routes, payoffs, the invisible architecture of control his organization had built over 2 decades. "No. Her name is Zara. She's a trauma counselor. Works with the dock workers in your territory on weekends." I said no. His aunt set down her tea with enough force to make him look up. She was 71, but still sharp as broken glass. Her eyes held the same steel that had helped her raise him after his father's murder, the same will that had kept the family intact when vultures circled. "Your father made me promise something before he died," she said quietly, "that I'd make sure you didn't become so hard you forgot what it means to be human." Tae-hoon's jaw tightened. "I'm fine. You're alone, and you've convinced yourself that's strength." She stood, smoothing her traditional hanbok. "One blind date. If you hate her, I'll never mention it again. And if I don't show up?" Hello viewers, welcome to this story. Before we continue, I'd like to know where you're watching from. Please type your location in the comments below. We'd be grateful if you could support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thank you. Her smile was thin, dangerous. "Then I'll invite her to the family memorial next month. Let her see exactly who we are. Let her ask questions about your father's business in front of the men who still owe us loyalty." The threat landed like a fist to the chest. The memorial was sacred ground. Politicians, police captains, rival family heads, all paying respects. Bringing an outsider, especially one who counseled the very workers his organization controlled, would be chaos. This is manipulation. This is love. His aunt picked up her purse. "Thursday night, 8 p.m. The restaurant near the harbor. I'm texting you the address. Don't be late." She left before he could argue further. Tae-hoon sat alone in his office, surrounded by maps of Busan's shipping routes and photographs of men who owed him money or fear, or both. Somewhere out there, a woman named Zara was probably going about her day, completely unaware that she was about to become a footnote in his carefully controlled life. 1 date, 2 hours maximum. Then he'd return to his rules, and his aunt would return to her garden, and everything would continue exactly as it should. He told himself this several times before Thursday arrived. The restaurant was quiet, the kind of place where conversations disappeared into wood-paneled walls, and the staff knew better than to remember faces. Tae-hoon arrived exactly on time, which was unusual for him. Being late established dominance. Being on time suggested respect he didn't feel. But his aunt had chosen this battle carefully, and he respected strategy even when it was used against him. Zahra was already seated. That was the first surprise. Most women showed up late to meetings with him, having heard whispers about his name and his reach, deciding that making him wait was somehow a power move. But she sat at the corner table his aunt had reserved, reviewing something on her phone, completely at ease. The second surprise was that she didn't look up when he entered. The third was that when she finally did, her eyes, dark brown, almost black, held no fear, no curiosity, no attempt to impress. Just exhaustion. "You're late," she said, glancing at her watch. "No, I'm not." She smiled faintly. "Then I'm early. Either way, sit." Tae-hoon remained standing for a moment, thrown off balance. Women didn't speak to him this way. People didn't. "Your aunt was very kind when she arranged this," Zara continued, setting her phone down. "But let's be honest about what this is. You don't want to be here. I'm not what you're looking for. So let's order something decent, make polite conversation for an hour, and then we can both tell her we tried." There was something almost insulting about how easily she dismissed him. Tae-hoon was used to people trying too hard or trying to play games they thought he'd fall for. This was neither. He sat down. "You work with dock workers," he said. It wasn't a question. "Trauma counseling. Most of them are migrants, West African, Southeast Asian. They get injured, exploited, and then quietly erased from the system. She spoke without drama, just stating facts. Your aunt said you run a shipping business. She didn't say what kind. Logistics. That's a very clean word for what I'm guessing is a very dirty operation. Taehoon's eyes narrowed. You don't know anything about what I do. I know the men I counsel are terrified of someone. They won't say who. They just pay money they don't have to people they never see. She tilted her head. Is that you? He should have ended the dinner right there. Instead, he asked, what makes you think you're safe asking me that? Zara studied him with the same exhausted calm. Because men who are actually dangerous don't need to prove it. And your aunt loves you too much to set me up with someone who'd hurt me. She wasn't Korean. She wasn't careful in the way people in his world had learned to be. And she wasn't trying to impress him or survive him. She was just present. For the first time in years, Taehoon didn't know what to say. And that's when everything began to change. Because Zara didn't stand up when he arrived. She didn't smile too wide or adjust her posture or do any of the small, performative things people did when they wanted to impress him or survive him. She just glanced up from her phone, met his eyes with that same exhausted calm, and gestured to the empty chair. Sit. Not a question, not a request. Taehoon sat. The waiter appeared immediately, the kind of instant service that money and reputation bought. Before Taehoon could speak, Zara was already ordering. I'll have the grilled mackerel, steamed rice, and whatever banchan the kitchen recommends tonight. She handed back the menu without looking at it twice, then turned to Taehoon. You? He stared at her. Women didn't order first. Not in his world. Not in any world he'd operated in for the past decade. The same, he said finally. The waiter disappeared. Silence settled between them like fog rolling in from the harbor. Zara didn't rush to fill it with nervous chatter or calculated questions. She simply waited, hands folded on the table, watching him with the same clinical attention she probably gave her patients. Your aunt didn't tell me what you do, she said eventually. That usually means it's something you're ashamed of. Taehoon's jaw tightened. I'm not ashamed of anything. Then what do you do? Logistics. Shipping routes. Import, export. Those are very clean words. Zara tilted her head slightly. The men I work with, dock workers, mostly migrants. They use different words. Protection money. Disappeared shipments. Accidents that aren't accidents. She wasn't accusing him, just observing. Somehow, that was worse. You work with dock workers, Taehoon said, redirecting. Trauma counseling. West African, Southeast Asian, men who come here looking for work and end up injured, exploited, erased. She spoke about them the way other people spoke about weather, factual, measured, no sentimentality. They get hurt loading containers, develop respiratory problems from chemical exposure, can't afford treatment, can't report injuries because they're afraid. Afraid of what? Zara's eyes didn't leave his face. You tell me. The food arrived, saving him from answering. They ate in silence for several minutes. Taehoon watched her from across the table, trying to categorize her, trying to find the angle she was working. There wasn't one. Why did you agree to this? He asked finally. Your aunt was kind to me. I volunteer at a clinic she supports. Zara set down her chopsticks. She talked about you like you were still the boy she raised, not the man everyone else seems afraid of. And what do you think? I think, Zara said slowly, that men who are proud of what they do don't hide behind silence and clean words like logistics. That should have angered him. Taehoon had built his reputation on silence, on the kind of control that didn't require explanation or justification. People feared what they couldn't read. But Zara wasn't trying to read him for leverage. She was simply stating what she saw. My family controls shipping routes, he said, the words coming out harder than intended. Debt networks, protection services, things that keep the port running smoothly, even if that means some people get hurt. Some people, Zara repeated. Like the men I counsel. Probably. She nodded once, like he'd confirmed something she'd already suspected. So you're part of the machine. I am the machine. Then the question, Zara said, meeting his eyes directly, is whether you're aware of the damage or just pretending it's not yours. Taehoon's hand tightened around his chopsticks. No one spoke to him this way. Not his lieutenants, not rival family heads, Not even his aunt, who knew him better than anyone. You don't know anything about my world. I know the men it breaks. Zara's voice remained steady, not challenging, just honest. I know they pay money they don't have, to people they never see. I know they work through injuries that should hospitalize them. I know their children go hungry while someone else gets rich off their fear. And you think I should feel guilty about that? I think, Zara said quietly, that guilt would require you to see them as people first. And I'm not sure you do. The truth of it hit harder than any accusation. They finished the meal in silence, not uncomfortable, but weighted with things neither of them was ready to say. When the check came, Tehun paid without discussion. Zara didn't argue or perform gratitude. She simply stood, gathered her coat, and walked toward the exit. Outside, rain had started to fall, light, persistent, turning the harbor lights into smeared reflections on wet pavement. Thank you for dinner, Zara said. You're not what I expected. Tehun found himself replying, neither are you. She studied him for a long moment, rain dampening her hair, her expression unreadable in the dim light. Your aunt will ask how it went, she said. What will you tell her? That you're honest, at least, even when the honesty isn't flattering. Zara paused. And that I'd be willing to meet again. If you are. Tehun should have said no. Should have ended this before it became complicated. Friday, he said instead. Same time. I'll text you the place. Zara smiled small, tired, genuine. Okay. She walked away into the rain, and Tehun stood there longer than he should have, watching her disappear into Busan's wet streets, wondering what the hell he'd just agreed to. And why some part of him, some part he'd thought died years ago, was already counting the days until Friday. They met again the following Friday. And then the Tuesday after that. And then on a rainy Sunday afternoon, when Zara texted him between shifts at the clinic. They didn't call it dating, didn't define what was happening. They just kept meeting at quiet restaurants, late-night cafes, once on a bench overlooking the harbor, while cargo ships moved through the darkness like sleeping giants. And Zara kept asking questions. What does loyalty mean to you? She asked one evening over coffee. Tehun looked up from his cup. Why? Because you use that word a lot. Your men are loyal. Your family built loyalty. But I'm trying to understand what you think it means. He considered this. It means they do what needs to be done. Without question. Without hesitation. So obedience, Zara said. No. Loyalty. What's the difference? Tehun set down his cup, irritation flickering across his face. Obedience is fear. Loyalty is choice. Is it? Zara leaned forward slightly. Because the men I work with, the ones who pay your organization, they don't look like they're choosing anything. They look terrified. That's different. How? He didn't have an answer that didn't prove her point. The questions came at him from angles he'd never had to defend. She asked about power, whether controlling people was the same as protecting them. She asked about violence, whether necessity was just a word men used when guilt became inconvenient. She asked about the shop owners who wouldn't meet his eyes, the restaurant staff who moved too quickly when he entered a room. Things Tehun had stopped noticing years ago. Now he couldn't stop noticing them. One evening, leaving a restaurant in his territory, he watched the owner bow too low, his hands shaking slightly as he held the door. Tehun had known this man for 5 years. Knew his daughter was in university. Knew he'd expanded the business last year. Knew he was afraid. He respects you, Tehun said as they walked to the car. Zara was quiet for a moment. That's not what respect looks like. Then what is it? Survival. The word hung between them like smoke. Another night, Zara mentioned one of her patients, a young man with a compression injury in his spine, who'd kept working for 3 weeks before collapsing. He said he couldn't afford to stop, she told Tehun. Said he owed money to someone. Protection fees. Tehun's jaw tightened. A lot of people operate in this port. But only one controls the routes where he works. Zara wasn't accusing, just observing. Does that bother you? Why would it? Because he's 23 years old and he'll probably never walk normally again. Tehun stared out at the harbor, watching containers being loaded under harsh industrial lights. He'd watched this scene 1,000 times. Workers moving like machinery. Efficient. Profitable. He'd never once thought about their spines. You think I should feel guilty, he said. I think you've built a life where you don't have to feel anything. Zara's voice was soft, not cruel. And I'm wondering if that's protection or just a different kind of prison. The statement unsettled him more than any accusation could have. Weeks passed. The meetings continued. And slowly, so slowly, Taehoon almost didn't notice something shifted. He started seeing his world through her eyes. The flinches, the careful words, the way conversations stopped when he entered rooms, the way his lieutenants laughed too hard at things that weren't funny, the way money moved through his organization, cleaned and legitimized, while the men who generated it limped through 12-hour shifts with taped wrists and untreated injuries. He'd built this, maintained it, profited from it, and never once questioned whether he should. One night, sitting in his car, overlooking the docks, Zara said something that changed everything. I want to see your world. Taehoon turned to her. What? Not the restaurants, or the clean parts you show everyone else. She met his eyes. The actual world, where the money comes from, where the fear lives. I want to see what you see. Why? Because I need to understand whether the man I'm spending time with knows what he's built, or if he's just good at not looking. Taehoon should have refused, should have kept that part of his life separate, sealed off, protected from judgment. Instead, he heard himself say, tomorrow night, 11 p.m., wear something you don't mind getting dirty. Zara nodded once. And Taehoon realized, sitting there in the darkness with cargo ships groaning in the distance, that he'd just agreed to let someone see him completely. Not the reputation, not the control, not the carefully maintained silence. Just the truth. And he had no idea what would happen when she did. The docks at night were a different world. Industrial lights carved harsh shadows across stacked containers. Forklifts groaned under impossible loads. Men moved in choreographed silence, loading ships bound for ports. Taehoon controlled through contracts and carefully applied pressure. He'd brought Zara here to show her efficiency, organization, the infrastructure that kept Busan's underworld running smoothly. She wasn't looking at any of that. How long has that man been favoring his left side? Zara asked, nodding toward a worker loading a container. Taehoon followed her gaze. The man was young, mid-20s, maybe moving carefully, his right arm held at an awkward angle. I don't know. 3 weeks, at least. Maybe longer. Zara's voice was clinical. Rotator cuff injury, probably a tear. He needs an MRI and physical therapy. Then he should see a doctor. With what money? What insurance? She turned to him. What happens if he stops working? Taehoon didn't answer. They walked deeper into the facility. His men nodded as they passed, respectful, careful, never making direct eye contact for too long. Taehoon had always read this as deference, hierarchy maintained. Now, watching Zara watch them, he saw something else. Fear dressed up as respect. Near the south containers, a supervisor was shouting at a crew in rapid Korean mixed with broken English. 3 men stood with their heads down, absorbing the verbal assault without response. One had a bandage visible beneath his work glove. Zara stopped walking. What are they being punished for? She asked quietly. Slow loading times, Taehoon said. The ship needs to leave on schedule. The one with the bandaged hand, he's supporting his weight on his left leg. Ankle injury, probably sprained, maybe fractured. Zara's tone remained steady, factual. He's working at half speed because he's working injured. Then he should have reported it. To who? Zara looked at him. Your supervisor? Your organization? The same people who decide whether he keeps his job, keeps his housing, keeps sending money to whatever family is depending on him? Taehoon's jaw tightened. This is how ports operate, everywhere. It's not personal. No, Zara agreed. It's systematic. Which is worse. They continued the tour in silence. Taehoon pointed out the security measures, the efficiency protocols, the profit margins that made this operation valuable. Zara nodded politely, but her eyes kept returning to the workers. The men with taped wrists, the ones moving too carefully, the young guy with hollow eyes who flinched when a forklift backfired. Near the west gate, a man collapsed, not dramatically, just a sudden buckling, like his legs had stopped receiving signals from his brain. He went down between containers, and for a moment, no one moved. Then the supervisor started shouting. Zara was already running. Taehoon followed, watching her drop to her knees beside the man, West African, early 20s, conscious but struggling to breathe. She checked his pulse, his eyes, asked questions in English that came out too fast, too urgent. "Call an ambulance," she said without looking up. "He's fine," the supervisor said in Korean. He's bleeding internally." Zara's voice cut through the noise like broken glass. "Look at his eyes, his skin tone. He needs a hospital now." Taehoon pulled out his phone, made the call, watched Zara work with professional precision, keeping the man conscious, keeping him still, talking to him in low, steady tones. "What's your name?" she asked. "Kofi," the man whispered. "Kofi, stay with me. Help is coming." The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later. As they loaded Kofi onto the stretcher, one of the paramedics asked about next of kin, about insurance, about payment. Zara gave them her hospital credentials and said she'd handle it. After they left, silence settled over the dock like oil on water. The other workers had already returned to loading containers. The supervisor was checking his clipboard. Everything continuing exactly as it had before. Taehoon stood beside Zara, watching her stare at the space where Kofi had collapsed. "He paid you 3 days ago," she said quietly. "What?" "Protection money. I saw the notation in his phone once when he was at the clinic." Zara turned to face him. "He paid your organization 3 days ago, and tonight he was working with internal bleeding, because stopping means losing everything." "I didn't know." "That's not a defense." Her voice wasn't angry, just exhausted. "These men will never report what happens to them. They're too afraid, and someone taught them to be." The accusation landed like a physical blow. "I don't," Taehoon started. "Yes, you do." Zara's eyes held his. "You walk through here and see efficiency. I see men working through injuries that should hospitalize them. You see respect. I see terror. You see a well-run operation. I see people who've learned that survival means silence. This is how the world works." "No," Zara said. "This is how your world works, and the fact that you can't see the difference is the most terrifying thing about you." She walked toward the exit without waiting for him. Taehoon stood alone among the containers and the injured workers and the careful silence, unable to defend what he'd built, unable to deny what she'd seen. For the first time in 10 years, shame moved through him like poison in the blood, and he had no idea how to make it stop. Taehoon couldn't stop thinking about Kofi. 3 days. The man had paid protection money 3 days before collapsing on a dock Taehoon controlled, loading cargo that generated profit. Taehoon collected, under supervision Taehoon's organization provided. The math was simple, brutal, undeniable. He called the hospital the next morning. Ruptured spleen, the nurse told him. Internal bleeding for at least a week, maybe longer. Another few hours and he would have died. Taehoon hung up and stared at his desk at the shipping manifests, the collection reports, the clean numbers that represented broken bodies and swallowed fear. He'd built this system, maintained it, defended it as necessary, and nearly killed a 23-year-old kid in the process. That night, he canceled 2 collection runs. "Boss?" His lieutenant, Min Jun, looked confused. "These are scheduled. I said cancel them, but the Kim family will see that as—" "I don't care what they see it as." Taehoon's voice came out harder than intended. "Cancel them." Min Jun left, but not before exchanging a glance with the other men in the room. The kind of glance that meant questions were being asked, doubts forming. Weakness had a scent in this world, and Taehoon was starting to reek of it. Over the next 2 weeks, he pulled back further. Routes he would have defended viciously, he quietly negotiated away. Debts he would have collected with interest, he forgave. Protection contracts he would have renewed automatically, he let expire without explanation. His organization noticed. "People are talking," Min Jun said carefully one evening. "They're saying you've changed, that you're distracted. Let them talk." "Boss, the Song family is testing our territory. They moved product through the South Harbor twice this week. Before, we would have I know what we would have done before. Min Jun studied him with the careful attention of a man trying to read a map that had suddenly changed language. Is this about the woman? Tae-hoon's silence was answer enough. With respect, Min Jun said slowly, she doesn't understand our world. What we do keeps order, prevents chaos. Without us, men like Kofi wouldn't work themselves to death out of fear. Tae-hoon met his lieutenant's eyes. Don't tell me what she doesn't understand. Tell me what we've been pretending not to see. Min Jun left without another word. That night, Zara called. Kofi's stable, she said. He'll survive, but he'll need months of recovery. He can't work, can't pay rent, can't send money to his family in Ghana. I'll take care of it, Tae-hoon said immediately. With what? Zara's voice was tired. Blood money? Protection fees from other men just like him? Then what do you want me to do? Silence on the line. Long enough that Tae-hoon thought she'd hung up. I want you to choose, she said finally. Not for me, not to impress me, or win me over, or fix what's broken between us, but for yourself. I want you to decide who you actually are when no one's watching, when there's no reputation to maintain, or empire to protect. Zahra, I can't keep seeing you if nothing changes. Her voice cracked slightly. I sit across from you at dinner, and I see someone good trying to break through. But then I visit the docks, and I see the machine that person built, and I don't know which one is real. Both, Tae-hoon said quietly. Both are real. Then choose which one survives. Zara took a shaky breath. Because I work with the people your world destroys. Every day I counsel men who are terrified, injured, trapped, and I won't love someone who's the reason they need counseling in the first place. The word love hung between them like a confession neither had meant to make. What if I can't walk away? Tae-hoon asked. What if the organization? Then you've already chosen. Zara's voice steadied. And we're done. Give me time. Time to do what? Find a way to keep everything you have while convincing yourself you've changed? She paused. I've seen that before, Tae-hoon. Men who want redemption without sacrifice. It never works. So what do you want? I want you to burn it down. The words came out fierce. Final. Not for me. For the version of yourself you could be if you stopped protecting the version you are. That's not possible? Fair? Realistic? Zara's laugh was hollow. You're right. It's not. But anything less is just rearranging deck chairs while men like Kofi keep bleeding. Tae-hoon closed his eyes. Thought about his father's empire, his lieutenants, the territory he'd spent a decade building and defending. Thought about Kofi's hollow eyes, the workers' flinches, the systematic fear he'd called respect. Thought about Zara, asking him to become someone he'd never imagined he could be. If I do this, he said slowly, there's no coming back, no middle ground. It means giving up everything. I know, I could lose everything, including you. You'll definitely lose me if you don't. Zara's voice softened slightly. But this isn't about keeping me, Tae-hoon. This is about whether you can live with who you are. Because I don't think you can anymore. She was right. He'd stopped sleeping through the night. Stopped enjoying the power he'd once wielded without hesitation. Every decision felt contaminated now. Every profit margin stained with blood he could no longer pretend not to see. Okay, he whispered. Okay, what? I'll do it. I'll burn it down. Silence. Then, this doesn't erase what you did. It just decides who you'll be next. She hung up. Tae-hoon sat alone in his office, surrounded by the architecture of an empire built on fear, and began planning its destruction. Tae-hoon started with the debts. Not dramatically, not publicly, just quiet cancellations in ledgers that had tracked fear and compliance for years. Workers who owed 3 months of protection fees suddenly owed nothing. Shop owners who'd been paying for safety received polite notices that their contracts were void. No explanations, no apologies. Just silence where threats used to live. Boss, we need to talk about the numbers. Min Jun spread financial reports across the desk. Revenue is down 40% this month. The protection contracts alone. I know. The Kim family is asking questions. The Song family is moving into territories we abandoned. If we don't respond, we won't respond. Min Jun stared at him like he'd started speaking a foreign language. What? Let them have it. Tae-hoon signed another release form, this one transferring a shipping route his father had killed to acquire. We're getting out. Out of what? Everything. The word landed like a grenade. Over the next 3 weeks, Tae-hoon systematically dismantled what his family had spent 2 generations building. Roots were sold to legitimate companies. Front businesses closed or transferred to competitors. Debt records disappeared into shredders. His lieutenants watched with increasing alarm. This is suicide, one of them said during a tense meeting. We're exposed, vulnerable. Every family in Busan will see this as weakness. Let them. And when they come for what's left, Tae-hoon met his eyes. There won't be anything left to take. The rumors started immediately. Tae-hoon was sick. Tae-hoon was compromised. Tae-hoon had lost his mind over some woman. The last one was closest to truth. He told Zara what he was doing over coffee one afternoon. Expected something: gratitude, approval, recognition that he was destroying his entire life for a chance at becoming someone different. She just nodded. Good, she said. That was it. No celebration, no absolution. That's all? Tae-hoon asked, unable to hide his frustration. I'm giving up everything and you say good? Zara set down her cup carefully. What do you want me to say? That you're heroic for stopping something you should never have been doing in the first place. I'm losing everything. Men like Kofi lost everything when your organization decided their bodies were less important than your profit margins. Her voice stayed level but firm. This doesn't make you noble, Tae-hoon. It makes you finally responsible. The words stung worse than any accusation. I thought you'd be happy. I am, Zara said quietly. But I'm not going to praise you for doing the bare minimum of being a decent human being. This doesn't erase what you did. It just decides who you'll be next. They sat in silence. Outside, Busan continued its rhythm: ships, traffic, the ordinary machinery of a city that had no idea an empire was dying quietly in coffee shops and signed documents. I'm scared, Tae-hoon admitted. You should be. What if I can't? Then you fail. Zara's hand reached across the table, resting near his, but not quite touching. But at least you'll fail as yourself, not as your father's ghost. Something fragile was forming between them. Not romance, not forgiveness, just 2 people trying to figure out if transformation was actually possible or just another story people told themselves. Tae-hoon wanted to believe it was possible. Most days, he wasn't sure. The threats started in week 4. First, veiled messages through intermediaries. Sung-min, a former partner Tae-hoon, had cut loose when dismantling operations, wanted a meeting, wanted explanations, wanted compensation for lost territory. Tae-hoon ignored them all. Then the messages became less veiled. You're making us all look weak. This stops or you stop. Choose carefully. Tae-hoon changed his security protocols, varied his routes, stopped meeting people in predictable locations. He didn't tell Zara. That was a mistake. The message arrived on a Thursday night while Zara was closing the clinic. A single text from an unknown number. Men like him don't change. Ask him how many people disappeared for his peace of mind. Ask him about the bodies that made his empire possible. Then ask yourself if redemption is real or just good marketing. SM. The phone number belonged to Sung-min, but the message was meant for Zara. She called Tae-hoon immediately. Who is SM? Her voice was controlled, but he could hear the edge underneath. Tae-hoon's blood went cold. Where are you? The clinic. Tae-hoon, who locked the doors. Don't leave until I get there. He was already moving, grabbing his keys, his phone. Don't talk to anyone. Don't answer the question. Zara's tone shifted. Who is he, and why is he texting me about bodies? Tae-hoon stopped in the middle of his apartment, phone pressed to his ear, all the air suddenly gone from his lungs. Because there was only one honest answer, and it would destroy everything fragile they'd built. His name is Sung Min, Tae-hoon said quietly. He used to work with my organization, and he's right. Silence on the line. Right about what? Tae-hoon closed his eyes. Everything he's going to tell you. Every terrible thing. It's all true. Tae-hoon. I'll explain everything. But first, I need to make sure you're safe. His voice cracked slightly. Please, lock the doors. I'm coming. Zara hung up without answering. And Tae-hoon drove through Busan's night streets, knowing that the past he'd been trying to burn down was about to burn him instead. Zara was waiting outside the clinic when Tae-hoon arrived. Not inside with the doors locked like he'd asked, just standing under the streetlight, arms wrapped around herself against the cold, staring at her phone like it contained a language she was still learning to read. How many? She asked before he could speak. Tae-hoon stopped 3 feet away. Zara, how many people disappeared because of you? The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun already fired. I don't know the exact number. Estimate. Tae-hoon's throat tightened. 7. Maybe 8. Over 10 years. Zara's face didn't change. She just nodded slowly, like he'd confirmed something she'd already calculated. Were they alive when they disappeared? Some? And the others? No. She looked at him, then really looked at him, and Tae-hoon saw something break behind her eyes. Not anger. Worse. Understanding. Tell me everything, she said. Not the sanitized version. Not the version that makes you sympathetic. Everything. So he did. He told her about the dock supervisor who'd been skimming profits and was found 3 weeks later in a container bound for Manila, barely alive, missing 2 fingers as a reminder. He told her about the rival family lieutenant who'd threatened his aunt and simply stopped existing. No body, no investigation, just a name that people learned not to say out loud. He told her about the worker who'd tried to organize others against protection fees and ended up in the hospital with injuries the police never properly investigated. About the shop owner who'd gone to the authorities and lost his business to a mysterious fire 2 days later. He told her about the nights he'd slept without guilt, because guilt interfered with business. About the way he'd learned to see people as assets or obstacles, never as human beings with families and futures and fears that mattered as much as his own. He told her everything. Zara listened without interrupting. Tears ran down her face, but she didn't make a sound, just stood there in the cold, while Tae-hoon dismantled whatever fragile thing had been growing between them, word by careful word. When he finished, silence settled over them like ash. I was wrong, Zara said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. About what? I thought you were someone good trying to break free from something bad. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. But you weren't trapped in that world, Tae-hoon. You were that world. You built it, maintained it, defended it. I know. And now you want credit for dismantling what you never should have created? I don't want credit, Tae-hoon said. I just want… What? Forgiveness? Zara's laugh was broken, hollow. I counsel trauma survivors. Tae-hoon, I help people recover from exactly the kind of violence you inflicted. And I've been sitting across from you at dinner, letting you touch my hand, thinking maybe… She couldn't finish. I'm not that person anymore, Tae-hoon said desperately. You were that person 3 months ago. Zara stepped back. You were that person when we met, when you took me to the docks, when you… Her voice cracked. I can't do this. Zahra, please. I don't love the man you were. She was crying openly now. And I don't know if the man you're trying to become is real or just performance. Just another way to control the narrative. It's real. How do I know that? Zara's voice rose. How do I know you're not just good at adapting, at becoming whoever you need to be to survive? You've spent 10 years being a monster. What makes you think 3 months of dismantling changes that? Tae-hoon had no answer. Zara turned away. I need time. I can't see you right now. How much time? I don't know. She was already walking toward her car. Maybe forever. Zahra, don't follow me. Don't call. Don't. She stopped, her hand on the car door. If you ever actually cared about me, you'll give me space to figure out if anything we built was real. She drove away. Tae-hoon stood alone under the streetlight, watching her taillights disappear into Busan's endless traffic, feeling something inside him collapse that he didn't have words for. 3 weeks passed. Tae-hoon didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up at the clinic, or try to explain or justify or bargain his way back into her life. He just existed in the wreckage of who he'd been, alone with the truth of what he'd done. His organization continued to dissolve. Former partners stopped returning calls. Territories vanished. Money dried up. The empire his father had built, that Tae-hoon had expanded and defended, became a ghost story people told in careful whispers. Sung-min's messages escalated. First, to Tae-hoon, "You destroyed everything we built. There are consequences." Then, to intermediaries, "Tell him to watch his back." Then, finally, directly to Zara, "He thinks he can just walk away. But men like us don't get redemption. We get what we deserve." The threat was clear. Tae-hoon sat in his apartment, smaller now, cheaper. The penthouse sold to cover debts he was settling, and stared at his phone. For 10 years, he'd solved problems the way his father had taught him, with violence, with fear, with power applied precisely, until obstacles disappeared. That version of himself would have made Sung-min disappear, would have protected Zara, the only way he knew how. But that version of himself was also the reason Zara had left. So Tae-hoon made a choice he'd never imagined possible. He picked up his phone and called the police. "I need to report threats," he said when someone answered. "And I need to provide testimony about organized crime activity in Busan's port district." "Your name?" Tae-hoon took a breath. "My name is Tae-hoon, and I'm ready to tell you everything." The interrogation room was smaller than Tae-hoon expected. Bare walls, metal table. 2 detectives who'd been investigating his family's operations for years, suddenly faced with the one witness who could dismantle everything. "Before we begin," Detective Park said carefully, "you understand what you're doing here?" Tae-hoon nodded. "I'm destroying what's left of my life. You're also making enemies who won't forget." "I know." Park exchanged a glance with his partner. They'd been chasing Tae-hoon's organization for half a decade, raids that found nothing, witnesses who disappeared, evidence that evaporated before trials. Now he was sitting across from them, voluntarily, offering everything. "Why now?" Park asked. Tae-hoon thought about Zara, about Kofi, about all the men who'd learned to flinch before him. "Because I'm tired of being afraid of who I am," he said quietly. The testimony took 4 days. Tae-hoon named routes, operations, officials who'd taken bribes. He detailed protection rackets, described how debts were enforced, explained the careful architecture of fear his organization had built. He provided documents, recordings, photographs, evidence he'd kept as insurance that now became ammunition against everything he'd built. Detective Park listened with the focused attention of a man watching a puzzle finally assemble itself. "Sung-min," Park said on day 3. "Tell us about him." So Tae-hoon did. He described Sung-min's role in the organization, the territories he'd controlled, the violence he'd authorized, the message he'd sent to Zara. "He's escalating," Tae-hoon said, "threatening a civilian because I walked away. She has nothing to do with this." "She has everything to do with this," Park said, not unkindly. "She's why you're here." Tae-hoon didn't deny it. The investigation moved quickly once the testimony was on record. Warrants were issued, assets frozen. Sung-min was arrested 3 days later at a restaurant in Gangnam, still arrogant enough to think himself untouchable. He wasn't. The trial took months. Tae-hoon testified publicly, watching former partners and rivals sit in courtroom galleries, their faces carefully neutral, their eyes promising future consequences. He'd lost everything by then: money, property, safety, respect. The organization his father had built was gone. The empire Tae-hoon had expanded existed only in court documents and police evidence logs. Sung-min received 8 years. Taehoon received nothing, no charges, no protection, no gratitude, just a quiet acknowledgement that his cooperation had dismantled something prosecutors had been chasing for years. He moved into a small apartment in a neighborhood where no one knew his name. Got a job doing logistics for a legitimate shipping company. Actual logistics. The kind that involved spreadsheets and delivery schedules instead of fear and violence. It was boring. It was clean. It was nothing like the life he'd known. Zara's absence ached, like a phantom limb present in every quiet evening, every meal eaten alone, every moment when he wanted to tell someone about the strange, ordinary life he was building and realized there was no one left to tell. He didn't contact her, didn't try to explain what he'd done or ask if it mattered. He just learned to live with the absence. 4 months after the trial ended, she appeared at his apartment. No warning, no message, just a knock on the door, and when Taehoon opened it, Zahara stood in the hallway looking tired and uncertain, and somehow exactly right. "Hi," she said. "Hi." They stared at each other for a long moment. "Can I come in?" Zara asked. Taehoon stepped aside. The apartment was small, plain, nothing like the penthouse she'd never visited but probably imagined. Zara looked around at the cheap furniture, the legitimate company ID badge on the counter, the complete absence of anything that suggested power or wealth or the man he used to be. "I heard about the testimony," she said finally. "I didn't do it for you." "I know." Zara sat on the worn couch. "That's why I'm here." Taehoon remained standing, uncertain. "I don't understand. When you testified, you lost everything." Zara met his eyes. "Your safety, your money, any chance of going back to that life. You made yourself vulnerable in a way that the old you never would have allowed. I had to protect you. You could have done that the old way. Made Sung-min disappear. Solved the problem with violence like you'd always done." She paused. "But you didn't. You chose the hard way. The way that actually required you to change who you are, not just what you do." Taehoon sat down across from her, maintaining distance. "Does that matter?" "Yes." Zara's voice was soft. "But it doesn't erase what you did. It doesn't bring back the people you hurt or fix the lives you destroyed. It just decides who you'll be next." "I know. I've been angry at you for months," Zara continued. "Angry that you lied. Angry that I didn't see it. Angry that I let myself care about someone capable of that much harm. You should stay angry." "Maybe," she smiled faintly. "But I'm also trying to figure out if people can actually change, or if we just tell ourselves they can, because the alternative is too depressing. And I don't know yet." Zara looked at him carefully. "I don't love the man you were, Taehoon. I can't. That person terrifies me." Something in his chest tightened. "But I respect the man who chose not to be him anymore." She reached across the space between them, her hand stopping just short of his. "The man who testified, who lost everything, who's sitting in this terrible apartment doing boring work and not complaining about it." "It's not that terrible," Taehoon said. Zara laughed, quiet, genuine. "It's pretty terrible." "Yeah." They sat in silence, not comfortable yet, not healed, but present, together. Two people trying to figure out if broken things could be rebuilt into something different. "I don't know if we can make this work," Zara said eventually. "I don't either. But I'd like to try. If you would." Taehoon looked at her, at the woman who'd refused to fear him, who'd asked questions no one else dared to ask, who'd made him see himself clearly for the first time in a decade. "Yes," he said. "I'd like to try." Zara's hand moved the final inches, covering his. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. It was just two people, honest about damage done and uncertain about what came next, choosing to build something fragile and real from the ruins of who they'd been. And for the first time since everything collapsed, Taehoon felt something like hope. 3 years later, Taehoon walked through Busan's harbor district like a ghost, visiting his own past. The docks looked the same. Container ships groaning under impossible loads. Forklifts carving paths through organized chaos. Workers moving with the practiced efficiency of men who'd learned their roles through repetition and necessity. But the fear was different now. Not gone, fear never disappeared from places where bodies were expendable and profit margins mattered more than safety, but changed, diluted. The systematic terror his organization had cultivated for 2 decades had fractured when he'd testified, scattering into smaller, less organized cruelties. It wasn't redemption, just slightly less damage. Tae-hoon would take it. "You okay?" Zara asked beside him. He realized he'd stopped walking, staring at the exact spot where Kofi had collapsed 3 years earlier. Different workers now, different supervisor, same hollow efficiency. "Yeah," he said, just remembering. They continued through the district. No one recognized him anymore, or if they did, they'd learned not to show it. The name that once commanded instant deference now meant nothing. Tae-hoon was just another man in ordinary clothes, walking beside a woman who didn't flinch when strangers stared. People still stared sometimes. At Zara, at them together, at the thing their relationship represented in a city that held on to its prejudices like family heirlooms. Tae-hoon used to brace for the old anger when he noticed those stares, the reflexive fury his father had passed down along with territory maps and blood debts. The rule that had governed his world for 32 years, unquestioned and absolute. Black women were off limits. Now he just held Zara's hand and kept walking. The anger never came. That version of himself, the one who'd needed rules to feel in control, who'd built empires on fear and called it strength, had died the night he'd testified. Not dramatically, not cleanly, just bled out slowly in interrogation rooms and courtrooms and quiet apartments where he'd learned to live without power. What remained was smaller, quieter, human. "Kofi's doing well," Zara said, breaking the silence. "He messaged me last week. He's working construction now. Union job. Benefits. His daughter just started school." Tae-hoon nodded. He'd paid for Kofi's medical bills anonymously. Blood money turned into something resembling restitution, though he knew the math would never balance. You couldn't repay years of systematic exploitation with one good deed and call yourself even, but you could stop making it worse. "And Sung Min?" Tae-hoon asked. 3 more years. Zara's voice was neutral. "His lawyer keeps filing appeals. They wouldn't work. The testimony had been too comprehensive, the evidence too damning. Sung Min would serve his full sentence, and when he got out, he'd find a world that had moved on without him." Tae-hoon knew that feeling intimately. They reached the small cafe where they'd had their second date, the one where Zara had asked about loyalty, and Tae-hoon had first started questioning answers he'd thought were permanent. Inside, they ordered coffee, sat by the window, watched Busan continue its ordinary rhythm. "Do you miss it?" Zara asked quietly. "Which part?" "The power, the respect, the version of your life where people were afraid of you." Tae-hoon considered this honestly. "Sometimes, late at night, when I'm paying bills and worried about job security, when I see men who did worse things, living better lives, because they never testified. But I sleep now." He met her eyes. "Actually sleep, without wondering which version of myself I'll wake up as." Zara's hand found his across the table. "I'm proud of you." "You shouldn't be." "I know," she smiled faintly. "But I am anyway." They sat in comfortable silence. Not perfect, not healed, but honest in a way that felt more valuable than any empire Tae-hoon had built through fear. Outside, the city continued. Ships departed for ports where other men like him still operated, younger, hungrier, convinced their violence was different, necessary, justified. Tae-hoon recognized the lie because he'd lived it for a decade. The lie that power and control were the same as strength. That fear was the same as respect. That rules passed down from fathers were the same as truth. His father's rule about race, about power, about who deserved consideration and who didn't, had seemed solid, unquestionable, as permanent as the concrete foundations holding up Busan's port infrastructure. It had taken one woman refusing to fear him to expose how fragile it actually was. One blind date to crack open a worldview he'd thought was armor. One honest question to start the collapse. Years later, people in Busan still whispered his name, but with confusion instead of fear. The former Mafia boss who'd testified against his own organization, who'd chosen prosecution over protection, who'd walked away from everything his father had built and somehow survived. They didn't understand it. Most days, Tae-hoon didn't either. He just knew that the man he'd been the one who'd needed rules and fear to feel secure would have destroyed Zara eventually, would have consumed her warmth until only compliance remained. And the man he'd become smaller, less certain, still learning how to be good instead of just powerful, got to sit across from her in cheap cafes and build something fragile and real. "What are you thinking?" Zara asked. Tae-hoon looked at her, at the woman who'd seen every terrible thing he'd done and still chosen to build something with whatever remained. "That the blind date didn't save me," he said quietly. No. It just exposed who I actually was." He squeezed her hand. "I had to choose whether to survive that honestly or keep hiding behind rules that were really just fear, dressed up as strength." Zara smiled. "And you chose honestly." "Eventually," Tae-hoon smiled back. Very eventually. They left the cafe hand in hand, walking through a city where Tae-hoon's name no longer commanded fear, where Zara no longer braced for hostility, where two people who should never have worked somehow built a life without apology. The rule had died. The man who'd lived by it had survived, and the woman who'd refused to fear him had made both things possible, not through saving him, but through seeing him clearly and asking one simple, devastating question: who will you choose to be? Tae-hoon was still answering that question, but now, finally, he was answering it honestly.